Hello,
Hey, how's it going?
going good. How about you?
I'm all right. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. I don't know why my laptop is complaining that my camera is being used by some other app
Yeah,
when literally my only thing is open is Zoom.
interesting.
Yeah,
Did you want to restart it or go without camera? Up to you.
yeah. Let me try and join back. Otherwise, we'll just go.
Oh god, I was thinking restart the laptop, but yeah.
Do you see two of me or just one?
There are two J's. Oh, okay. I heard my cat yowling. He was yowling at the window, not to get in. Oh, but there's another one. Little man. Hi. Now there's only one of you.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Why why there are two J's LinkedIn?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Something about not receiving a hang up signal, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think so too. Anyways, we can start if you want to. Rita and Sartesh are not going to be able to make it.
Okay.
So, did you have anything to discuss?
No, I mean, you saw my VAP PR comments, I'm guessing.
Yeah, yeah, I'm working on them.
Okay. And yeah, so just, I guess, if you had any questions for me about anything.
Uh, I did have one on. Let me pull that up. And I think just a second. Not this one. Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you see?
Now I can.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Uh, yeah, I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by this? Like, uh,
So that's the literal for a struct. I was just showing you the uh, how to create a struct in Rego. Uh,
okay,
I the idea being we no longer need to do the string packing unpacking, which is good for both avoiding ambiguity in the future of string syntax changes, which admittedly is not very likely. And two, it's a performance improvement because string operations are relatively expensive. And so if you just can use native types, it's faster. And it also should simplify the code a little bit.
but we don't really need type allowed, right? Like, it just could be whatever. This is just an example.
Uh, so allowed, I think, is a variable in this case. Uh, so I don't know. Like it's been a while since I've looked at that PR, but you need the information that you need to run the checks you kind of want to run, and just put
Yeah,
them in a struct rather than a string is the
idea.
the feedback.
Okay, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll work on this one. And yeah, I'm working on the other PR as well. It's just quite a lot of changes for the other one. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's the one where you're looking at the security context, if I
yeah,
remember. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the good part is that should drop a few hundred lines off your code, and not rely on uniqueness of container names across
yep,
like container, init container, etc.
yeah. Yeah, so the next thing was that, like we discussed earlier a little while ago, to publish some sort of like performance testing data for every release or something. So I was wondering, do you have any ideas about what do we want to release for 318, or any ideas?
Performance testing.
Yeah, like kind of, let's say, I mean, I know there are like lot many variables, and the data is not like relatable to everybody, but something like, hey, if you are using this for example, K8s required label and a constraint, and let's say you have like 10,000 pods in your cluster, you can expect the memory usage of uh, like, let's say you are running this policy on roughly 10,000 resources, you can expect the memory usage from audit or gatekeepers resources to be in this range or some sort.
Uh, this is a very old and maybe referencing, like, there's been a number of these conversations and none of them have happened in a while. I'm curious what has re-raised the salience of this.
Oh, it's just like, uh, I was talking with Sartesh and Rita, and it came up, so that's why I brought it up again.
Yeah, I mean, it. Again, I'm not really sure what we're talking about here, right? Are we like looking for performance regressions, or are we looking for like how, like, the memory requirements for running a given constraint, or what?
So what we want to target is roughly like something to put out, um, uh, on website or wherever, where users can see that if you are running gatekeeper at scale, uh, these are the numbers you should expect. So if like something is causing extraordinary memory usage or something like that, you may want to relook, or you may want to like look at the configurations you are making on gatekeeper to see what's going on. Basically, that's the idea.
Okay, well, those are two different things, right? Like, one is absolute numbers, and two is like tips for tuning. Um, Tips for tuning obviously is like a bit easier, because you just say, well, these are the knobs that you have, these are the impacts that they can have, and these are the situations where they're helpful, right? Like, oh, if you're syncing a lot of data, if you stop syncing, then you
Yeah.
don't need to use that memory, uh, for instance. I think the problem with giving specific numbers guidance is there are just too many unknowns, right? Like, I'm sure there could be some way of making this useful, but I'm also sure that that is very expensive to do, both like labor wise and machine wise, right? Like, actually having the machines for the load test and keeping that data up to date and making sure it has the kinds of profiling and coverage and explanation so that users can self-identify. Because like, you know, pod 10,000 pods, right, doesn't quite tell us as much as you'd think, because how many containers do those pods have, right? Are there like a lot of like labels and metadata? What size is your API server? Are we dealing with like network bottlenecks? Or are we dealing with RAM bottlenecks? Do you have any constraint templates that use referential across pods? In which case scaling should be impacted, right? So like trying to give a simple, easy, digestible number of like how Gatekeeper scales.
So
Uh,
that was the idea, right? Like how, if we can figure out a minimum and most restrictive criteria, and come up with a scenario or use case, we can probably start there, in terms of like publishing data that, hey, in this settings and this, if you are expecting this many violations through audit or something like that, this is the number of or range number in terms of memory consumption and CPU usage you should expect, given the audit interval is running at a specific interval. That sort of stuff.
I mean, it seems expensive. I'm not sure, like, has people been asking for that? I haven't heard that question in a long time.
Not right. Not right now, but I was talking to a friend of mine, when I joined. Like I onboarded onto Gatekeeper quite some time ago, and like he was basically interested, in, uh, looking at some type of like performance testing data or some sort like that. That was my individual experience for sure, but yeah, I was looking for issue if we have any, but my laptop is just giving me trouble.
Yeah, I mean, users, my opinion is users should do their own load tests, right? Because those are definitely gonna, they'll be able to look at the situations that matter to them, right? There's just a lot of variables, so we're not going to be able to give uniform guidance. um, One caveat to that would be if there is some sort of like marketing war happening, for lack of a better term, right? Where some project is going, look, we're X performance, then kind of we're dragged into that, right? um but unless that happens, I think our time is better spent improving the product and giving users guidance on like how they can improve their footprint requirements, so that they can build their own load tests that are specific to, again, their sort of cluster shapes and expected workloads, expected audit frequencies, expected QPS to the K8s API server. Like all of these kind of go together, right? Um, so, like, seriously, like how many how many months of time are you looking to spend on this? Would be my question on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's true. But like I was coming from more of a point that, can we start something like this, like with at the minimum scale, with the most basic use case? Would it be meaningful for users to do so?
I don't think it is. I think it's more misleading than helpful. There's no
Okay.
such thing as a basic use case, right? And if someone has a complex use case, they're going to see optimistic numbers and then be extremely dissatisfied if they rely on those numbers. um, and frankly, like, we don't want to put stuff out that requires effort to keep it evergreen, because that's just a drag on like the time we have to do other things, right? So it's not that I can't imagine a world where this is useful, but we would need to put in more effort to make it useful than probably the usefulness is worth, is my suspicion.
So basically, cost might be higher than the use case that it provides.
Yeah, like, I mean, take just Kubernetes itself, right? Like how much, and I actually don't know the answer to this. I've, speculation, but how much performance testing has core Kubernetes done, right? Kyverno, is there any like scale guidelines? Are we getting some sort of competitive advantage by going into that, or are we risking like losing competitive advantage because like VAP is delayed relative to Kyverno, and this like uh, this pushes that back further.
Yeah, I think Kyverno has some like scale testing data available, but yeah, I don't know if that is good enough reason for us to invest in this
Yeah,
already.
like it would need to be a something that drives user decision, right? In order to see a benefit. Like if someone was like, I love performance testing and I just want to do it because I want to do it and I will stick around, all that stuff, like, sure, absolutely. But when we're dealing with, if you work on performance testing, that's something else you are not working on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Sorry if that's like blunt, but like, yeah, like what would you rather spend your time doing?
Yeah. So does this summarize what we discussed? As of now, I don't want to be in a situation where we have this same conversation again and we are lost on what we discussed last time. So
So there's lots of variables such that it would be impossible for us to give simple, digestible numbers that project onto everyone's use case, which means performance, a simple performance test would be more misleading than helpful. Like a quick example would again be like referential versus not, right? Clusters with high QPS, clusters with low QPS. Are they looking to, massively multi-thread gatekeepers, so they're running like multiple threads for the serving webhook, or are they looking to keep it simple? Like all of those impact QPS capacity as well as memory usage.
yeah,
Um, the actual shapes of the resources being validated, what version of the constraint templates, which constraint templates they have active, what matching criteria they have, right? Like there are probably
so this is where I'm thinking, like, let's say somebody is using gatekeeper in a manner that is exhaustive for audit, right? It doesn't matter, like as long as we come up with two criteria, like one with syncing resource and one without syncing resource. Without syncing resource should be relatively
That
more accurate, right?
that is extremely misleading, right? Because which resources are being synced? Are you just syncing namespaces and you have like 10 namespaces but a billion pods, right? In which case syncing doesn't really impact anything. If you sync the pods instead, then memory usage spikes, right? So that's what I mean, is that you can't give a simple binary like syncing resources versus not. Which resources are you syncing? How many of them? What size are those resources? Are they used in referential constraints? Is it, if so, is it like an n squared kind of thing? Is it scaling with n? You know, so if you try to make it simple and digestible, that kind of detail will likely get lost, right, without significant effort. And if you include that detail, how do users map that onto their specific situation, right, with the constraint templates that they want to use and the shape of their cluster? And at that point, like, are users going to need to do their own load testing anyway? At which point the value proposition is like, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. um, cool. Let's say like I'll, yeah, if, in the next week meeting I'll just bring this up to see if Rita and Certus has something to say about it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and again, it's one of those things where it's hard to argue that there's no value in doing it. It's just a cost benefit trade off, both in terms of the cost of the feature, but also the opportunity cost in
yeah,
not doing other things.
yep, that makes sense. Cool. uh, we can move on. I don't have anything else on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, so next one was like if we can for the remainder of the time brainstorm on this dog itself. Like I did see your comment about like forming opinions on what is allowed under the interface and what is not. So if we can more brainstorm on what do we want to provide with and what do we expect from disk writers to be implemented.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
sorry, drivers to from drivers to be implemented.
yeah, one thing that's not really being captured in this doc just by like writing down interfaces is how those interfaces are used and like the temporal contract, right? Of like constructors, destructors, uh, like you can imagine saying, hey, this thing comes, you bring it to Gatekeeper pre-constructed and there is no destructor, or maybe you do have some sort of initialization logic. Um, I don't, I haven't had time to like form a strong opinion for myself for that. But the thing that I notice here is that there's kind of an asymmetry, right? Where there's the expectation of destructors, but not constructors, which seems like a little odd.
Hmm.
Uh, Probably the things to think about are like what are gatekeepers' needs, right? Like what can we provide in terms of life cycle, given where this would need to fit in gatekeepers code, whether it's in main.go and like called as part of bootstrapping, or whether it's done as part of, as I suspect, a controller, right? Because we're going to want to handle, if you want to have pub sub config objects, dynamically creating and destroying those config objects, right? Sorry, not the config objects, but the connections corresponding to those config objects. That's going to imply a certain amount of like operational constraint, right? Where gatekeeper is requesting of whatever is providing these injected dependencies. Like, hey, I have this config. How do I make a new instance of whatever this config is referring to? Uh, there's other, yeah, right now, currently what we're doing is we're just like injecting this stuff, right? Because we only have, am I right? Am I wrong here? Like, I think we're creating the driver what at bootstrap time, and then there's a controller that reads config maps and responds to them, and that
Yeah,
instantiates connections. Is that right?
yeah. So config controller looks at config map and then initializes the object. Oh, sorry, initializes the uh, initializes the respective object that handles like publish and maintaining connection and whatnot.
Yeah. So
Let me see. So, but yeah, I do think that it may be beneficial to also move the constructor and the interface itself. Right now, the constructor is independent, but it still is written as a part of a driver.
right. Well, and also like, is there one constructor? Is there many constructors? Where are we being opinionated here, right? So there's, okay, so you got new connection. That's less interesting to me. What's more interesting to me is how it's being used, right? So if we go to the controller that's like dealing with these Dapper connections.
Yeah, so I think it's called absurd connection, and this absurd connection basically goes out to the constructor in individual drivers. Yeah.
Okay, so how I interpret that, well, okay, and so what is a connection in this case? Is it like literally the connection to Dapper, or is this a connection to like, I forget how because Dapper has like
This
topics, but above topics is a category. I'm forgetting the terminology Dapper uses. Just
um,
as far as like which pub sub service is reaching out to.
so this function, can you indicate the line number you're talking about, like that
I'm not
you?
talking about any code line numbers right now. I'm just talking about Dapper and how Dapper works. There's, because PubSub, right, just has topics, right? Messages and topics.
Yeah,
But Dapper is an abstraction on top of that that multiplexes like many different connections.
yeah.
So, what is Dapper's terminology that rests above a topic?
So Dapper has these components, and those components basically define the connection and backend to use. And then Dapper has like wrappers around methods, for example, publish, and it uses that component to publish
Okay,
wherever.
so, but what is the word they use for, so you're saying component and you're saying connection. What is Dapper's appropriate terminology for specifying which pub sub service?
component, I think. Yeah.
Component? Okay.
Yes.
So when we say connection here, are we referring to a new component, or are we referring to a connection to Dapper like at all?
We are referring to a connection, uh, just as we are referring to a new tool, just like Dapper, may it be like RabbitMQ, Redis, whatever.
Okay, so a
It's not a new
connection.
component. Component part is like handled in the driver itself. Like that's
Okay,
different.
got it. So like from the controller's perspective, it's a connection, but once we get to the Dapper driver level, it's a component. Is that accurate?
Controller doesn't know about like whether or not there is a component in Dapper or not, or even if there is a uh, like Dapper backend is there or not, right?
I realize that. I'm asking how we've currently structured whether we have that abstraction built into the code or not.
Yeah, we do. So like right now what happens is if you want to use Dapper's uh, driver, right, like you in the config map you create, you basically mention the name of the component, and then in the publish itself, like Dapper uses that name of the component and takes in the topic, and then does whatever it does. Like we don't care about what the component object is right
Okay, can I see just the code for new connection in the Dapper driver? I think that'll answer my
now. Yeah.
question. All right, so component, new connection, config, Dapper client. Okay, so yeah, when we're just embedding the component into like a fake client. Okay, got it. Um, so going back to the controller,
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, this is one place where config. I really wish we hadn't used config maps for this. I'm glad that that's going away
Yeah.
because, like, yeah. How do we know which driver? Or are we just assuming Dapper right
No,
now?
no, we are not. So the config map that's being inputted needs to have a field called provider
Mhm.
and config, and basically provider field says that this config is supposed to be used by which drivers. So
I see. Right. Okay. And then the system multiplexes the drivers.
yeah,
Okay.
so system navigates based on the data passed in the absurd connection on which constructor to be called.
Okay. So system handles the life cycle.
Yeah.
All right. And then is system.
System is added as a part of a dependency when controllers like
Oh, good.
OTT
It's not.
webhooks are being initiated.
Yeah. It's not just Okay. So system.
This is almost similar to how we support multiple metrics backends right now.
Um. I mean, we support multiple metrics backends using the uh, open telemetry exporter interface, which is slightly different. Um, yeah, because we just let open telemetry handle all that for us,
No,
right?
I think we have multiple. metrics.
We do, but that's just a way. There's no system, right? That it's just we have the constructor for the various exporters, and we have a way to make it easy to wire in new exporters
Yeah,
as needed. Uh, it's different, right?
yeah,
Like the life cycle considerations are non-existent, right? We're
yeah,
just figuring out how to plug into OpenTelemetry there.
yep.
Um, okay, so yeah, if we go back to the design doc and we go back to the interface. So what have we got here? We've got,
This we can. I don't think this is needed. We can remove it.
are we calling it exporter? Man, I see now why we're using export. Yeah, I don't know. It might be fine, just like we shouldn't be drawing inspiration from OpenTelemetry for this. Like OpenTelemetry is a
But does OpenTelemetry also call it export? I don't know if it does.
yeah, they're called metrics exporters, but okay,
Oh,
that's just a happenstance. Okay, that's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. This was, yeah, this was just a coincidence.
Okay, so context, data interface, channel, string, close exporter. Okay, can we go back to the controller for a second? And let's go to the remove.
It's part of Upstart itself. Or not, let me see. Yeah, close connection. Sorry.
So we call close connection on the system.
This is the close connection.
Okay, so we have drivers, connections, systems. Probably, so the driver is probably the expert in like how, and I'm just going to use the terminology in the code for a second here, how a connection is spun up and torn down.
Yes.
The system knows the life cycle, right? It's the one that handles life cycle events like, hey, we want to establish a connection, we want to remove a connection. I think also the system is the thing that intermediates, like if there's a publish request, it goes through the system,
Yeah.
right? And the
System is abstraction between like gatekeeper and driver itself.
right, so it handles the routing.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, okay. Okay, I think I see. So probably what's best here, I'm thinking the drivers need to handle the caching of the connections. The system just needs to know which connection is owned by which driver. Actually, what is the publish? Okay, so we specify connection and topic. Okay, so connection is globally unique then.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what the expectation is.
Okay. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, that's what the expectation is, right? Because
Oh, sorry, you were
basically,
starting to say something before I said that, though.
what?
You were starting to say something before I said that. Like I get what the connection globally unique. Yeah, that no need to go into more detail.
Okay.
But I had interrupted you before then.
No, I don't think I was trying to say anything else.
Oh, okay. All right. So if the system multiplexes, drivers handle life cycle, is there such a thing as a connection interface?
There
Unclear.
is, right? Like, because we do want to call out like publish and like close or something else for driver level.
That's a, I mean, that's all behaviors that need to be handled. I'm just thinking about how to break it down. So if we go back to the shared, the doc, uh, exporter, is there, okay, and then is there a driver interface? What interface do we have right now?
Oh no, this is the only interface we have. Like, this is what it looks like right now.
Yeah, I don't think this is ideal.
What do you mean by drivers interface? This is something. This is the interface. Sorry, this is the interface that driver is supposed to implement right now to be plugged into the PubSub system.
I think we're gonna start talking in circles because there's like a few different there's at least two different designs we're looking at, right? There's the design in the code, there's the design in the doc.
This
Uh,
is
which
the this is
contains-
the same design. Like, it's just updating these functions to uh,
they right, but they use different names for things, and
yeah.
also there's a question of like just what do we write? Like because my intuition here is the fundamental structure is wrong, uh, given like how we're expanding this. Uh, like it seems like driver and connection are two different things. Yeah, like sorry, I'm getting a bit frustrated to be honest. I think the thing that's missing now is there is a structure. I'm calling it driver. Before it would have been like, hey, there's a thing that knows how to reach out to Dapper, that knows how to reach out to RabbitMQ. We're now extending that to knows how to create file handles or whatever and write to the file system or TCP connections or what have you. Uh, and the system needs to know how to instruct those entities, saying like, hey, there's a new thing, you should create it or hey, that thing has gone away, you should destroy it. It should probably be as unopinionated as possible about like the how, because the more opinionated we are, the less wiggle room the implementer has to do whatever they need to do to meet the like needs of their system. Sorry, I used the word system twice. The needs of, you know, whatever the thing is they're creating or destroying. Um, yeah, okay. So the idea of putting close on the thing that does export is kind of broken, I think. Yeah. Okay. Uh, I'm trying to remember. I think back in the Miss Mac. Okay. Okay. I think I see it. So if we just get rid of the connection or exporter interface altogether,
Okay.
and we just have, if we go back to the code, if we go to the system source code.
Yep.
So what are we calling them? Providers? Okay.
Yeah.
So if the provider handles all of this and we don't have the connection interface, right? So line 14 goes away.
Yeah.
Mac. We still need to map connection to provider, but system would be able to do that. So if a provider let's go back to the doc for a second. So let's just say exporter is taking the place of provider, right? It could still be called provider. No need to necessarily rename it, but just that's kind of what I'm thinking. So provider, this export method would need to include also the connection information. Back, stop.
Okay.
Um,
So then the connection objects are maintained by the driver itself.
exactly, and that
Given
gives
if there are multiple connections that we support. Right now we only support one, but
right. Well, it would allow. It would sort of be expected
okay.
that a driver be able to support multiple connections, or at least it should satisfy that interface.
Okay.
Like maybe it's fine for a driver to throw an error saying like, "Hey, you can only use me once," right? Like uh, that I haven't thought through. Um, but that's implicit in PubSub for sure, right? And I think it makes sense for like writing to a file as well, right? Like why not be able to open up multiple different files?
Yeah.
I haven't thought about whether there exists a singleton anywhere, but I think you'd run into this problem either way of how do you maintain the singleton. Um, regardless of what design you chose. So yeah, export, batch export, all of that.
Then we'll need to have a connection name here as well.
Exactly. Yes. And what that does, that will simplify if I start thinking about how to write a driver or an exporter or whatever we're talking about here. I no longer need to figure out if I'm like, let's say I'm creating a file exporter, right?
Okay.
And the thing that I need to make sure of is whenever one of my connections is closed, that I perform a flush and I do a copy, all that good stuff. And I need to, like, for whatever reason, globally lock and make sure there's no new files created or deleted while that happens. Like, I don't know why that's the case. Just go with me there. I would not need to figure out how to wire up message passing from a connection object to the exporter object to handle the state management at the global level. Does that make sense?
Okay. So what you're proposing is basically we driver should handle its own kind of connection, rather all type of connections of its own kind, rather than delegating it to the system.
Yes. I'd be curious if that breaks anywhere. So, like, test my thoughts.
Yeah.
But I think that yields easier life for everyone in the end. Like, simpler code all around.
Then it will be here as well. This we can just remove.
Well, okay, yeah. Cleanup we can remove, but you would need like a create.
Yeah, I'm
And
not sure about calling it exporter anymore, so I'm not.
yeah. I guess then that's one of the problems with design discussions is the names are kind of fluid. Um, you change sort of what's wrapped in an abstraction. Suddenly, the name no longer makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, Probably
But
gatekeeper's life is good.
okay, so right now, what happens in the system itself when publish is being called, a connection is also being uh, called, right? Like as a part of this function's call. So that's why right now only one connection is supported by audit because we pass it along from a flag. So I'm thinking if we move connection handling of connection to drivers itself in future, if we want to support multiple connection, how would we make a change here uh, to do that?
Well, okay, so are because the supporting of only one connection, that's not a limitation of how system is currently designed. That's a limitation of the design of, like, we chose to use flags, we hard coded the connection name, I think even in audit at some point, and the way audit is calling the system, right? Like, connection could be connection number one, could be connection number two, could be connection number three. Like, system could have 50 different connections,
Yeah.
and you just need to provide the right name when you call publish. So is that
That's,
what you mean by support multiple connections, or did I miss something?
yeah, no. So that's what my concern was. Like, we still want to, uh, we still want to delegate the responsibility of whoever calls publish to specifically mention the connection name as well.
Yes, I think so. Well, I don't think that's a bug. I think that's a feature, right?
Yeah,
Like if you just call publish and they can't specify the connection, then like if you have multiple connections, what are you just spraying it to all the connections?
yeah.
Is that that is a design? I'm not sure that's like the end state that we were thinking.
No, no, that's not what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure we address this as well. That's all.
Okay, yeah, and this does mean that system changes slightly and that we need to maintain a mapping from connection to a driver. It also means that we need to, if connection is meant to be unique, we should put some thought into how the connection name is specified, because there are Kubernetes primitives, or sorry, like if we're building this off of KRM, one thing we can say for sure is that uh, group kind namespace name is
Mhm.
globally unique in the K8s API, right?
Yeah.
So if we leverage that, then we don't need to figure out, hey, we have two objects, two different objects, both trying to
Establish the same
the same.
connection.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
right now, what we are doing is using config maps in the gatekeeper system namespace itself. Like wherever else the config map is defined, we just don't care about it. That means basically any config map in the gatekeeper system namespace will have unique names, right? And
Well, that's kind of missing the point, because the name of the config map then would need to be the name of the connection in order for that invariant to flow from the KRM API, right? Because KRM guarantees namespace name to be unique,
okay,
right? But if we're not using namespace name to name the connection, then that doesn't matter. That doesn't give us anything in terms of making the connection unique.
yeah,
We should also not use config map.
yeah.
Yeah. But so if we wanted to, though, require the object name to equal the connection name, and if we wanted to require all these objects to remain only in gatekeeper system, that's certainly one way of doing it. It does put some limitations on like how users can handle this later, right? Like basically whoever creates connections needs access to the gatekeeper system namespace. Um, is that a bad thing or not? Probably not, right? Because if we want to like mention connections in the contents of a constraint, you probably want someone with relatively high levels of privileges
Yeah,
specifying those things, just so that you can control who's allowed to break your
yeah,
um but the thing that it so yeah, it constrains how users can hold this down the line and what we could do for them, which is worth thinking about. But what it does also do is it simplifies. We don't need to deal with eventual consistency and the possibility of conflicts, which could be a nightmare
yeah,
when thinking about like stateful stuff like maintaining connections. Like we saw this with mutators. right, with mutators that conflict with one another. It's kind of, it would be the same problem with pub sub, but thornier because again, there's like a connection that lives or dies.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry for talking at you a lot. Is this like helpful?
Yeah. So it sounds like connection name and relation between connection to driver or an object can be resolved in a later time as well. Like we can have follow-up discussions around how we want to handle that situation. But for interface, I'm good.
Gotcha. Oh, sorry. You said the naming discussion we can defer. Or what was the thing that we could defer?
Yeah. Like how do we want to connect uh, and resource like Kubernetes resource and all the modifications, like whether we want it to be in the gatekeeper system namespace only or somewhere else, and those all decisions we can defer later as well, right? It doesn't impact.
I don't think we want to defer those for later, because like again, taking the name thing, if we are okay relying on group kind namespace name as the identifier, that streamlines the code, right? And avoids conflict detection and avoids the need to like
Yeah,
juggle connections, which might simplify exporter interface. If we decide actually we want to have the possibility of conflicts, right, then we probably need a little bit more state management,
yeah,
right? Like, and maybe we want state management down the line in any case, but uh, these things are connected, is my point. So, like, I know it's nice to say, hey, we could just like think about one thing, then think about this other thing, but no, there's a feedback loop here, right?
yeah. So what would be the benefits of and I'm just doing thought exercise here, that what would be the benefits of uh, not depending on like unique group version namespace name.
Well, for one, we wouldn't require a gatekeeper system namespace. That's a pretty big difference, right? So if you wanted to have some kind of multi-tenancy model with respect to connections, that gets a little easier. I suppose you could embed the namespace into the connection name. That seems a little odd to me, but it would be a way around that. But we would want to make that decision up front in order to avoid weird backwards compatibility shims, like, oh, if namespace isn't specified, assume it's gatekeeper system, or if not gatekeeper system, whichever namespace gatekeeper is running in, because remember, that's user configurable.
Yeah,
Um,
but
which, oh,
config map cannot be created without namespace anyway, right? And like I
again,
think
like we
I
should let's drop config map.
yeah. So that's what I'm getting. I was getting at, right? Like ideally, whatever CRD we come up with should also be namespace scoped uh, if we are replacing config map, or you think we can decide like that namespace or that CRD can be cluster scoped as well.
I'm not making a decision either way. My point was, your question was what would be the benefit of not having unique connection name
Yeah,
enforced by group kind namespace name. If it's cluster scoped, then that's just the same for the purposes of this discussion is requiring everything to be in gatekeeper system namespace.
Yeah.
Um, there's operational differences, but you know, with regard to the benefit, the question is, can we rely on K8s API conventions to enforce uniqueness or not, right? And if we can rely on K8s API conventions to enforce uniqueness, then that has an impact on multi-tenancy, right? Because the most basic multi-tenant model is to give everyone their own namespace or set of namespaces, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so if you wanted to do like multi-tenancy with connections and everything's in the gatekeeper system namespace, like how do you lock that down? How do you RBAC it so that one team doesn't step on another team's toes? And furthermore, like you still get the possibility of collisions, right? Now I'm kind of digressing and going, well, multi-tenancy is probably a bad idea anyway, but it is a thing you are foregoing, at least certain models of multi-tenancy. Another potential drawback is that then the connection name needs to comply with the Kubernetes object name. I don't think that matters because connection name is kind of arbitrary, right? Like Gatekeeper uses connection name, but there's no reason the driver needs to use the same name for its internal routing, right? Like if Dapper wanted to use like ASCII, like asterisks and all that in its
Yeah.
names, like they still could. Users might like it, they might not, right? Like, I think it might be kind of good for discoverability, like, oh, which object is configuring which connection? It's in the object name. Just keep
Yeah.
coming together. That seems nice. Like I mean I'm pretty sold on the mapping it to name.
Yeah.
I might actually suggest it be a cluster scoped resource just to avoid the gatekeeper system
Hmm.
oddness.
Yeah. Yeah. Constraints are also cluster scope resource, right?
Correct. Yeah, constraints and constraint templates.
Yeah. I think cluster scope resource may make sense.
Yeah, there was some thought about namespace scoped constraints at some point, and it's still a possibility, but there would be some semantics around that. Like a namespace scoped constraint would implicitly select objects from a specific namespace. But yeah, and that could still work.
So sounds like we agree. If the new CRD is constraint scoped, we don't necessarily need to change anything right now. Like as in terms of how connection is connected to driver.
If it's cluster scoped, yeah.
Yeah.
And if we are okay using the config name as the connection name.
Yeah.
Config name meaning the metadata name of the KRM resource.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So like given that, and I do wanna like discuss that part again with like Rita and Shirtes here, kind of to kind of know what their thoughts are. Uh, what is the next action item? Like for me.
I mean, so we update the design doc, we give an example of a config object. Yeah, we should design the config object. Like, that's not really scope creep. Like, that needs to exist before this feature exists anyway. Um,
And
it
one more thing, like, so this was an basically leeway to potentially get the export or like think about export design. But do you think we can just leave it out right now from the interface itself and then edit later, or like introduce another way to get the export in, batch export in, if need be?
so there is a backwards compatibility question here.
Yeah, that's
Uh, where if users are writing their own, I'm going to call it exporter for now, and then we add a new function in as a requirement to meet that interface, then
yeah,
users need to modify their exporter to meet that signature. There's methods for shimming this. Like, you can kind of do type discovery where you go, hey, if it doesn't satisfy the implements batch exporter thing, then like fake it by looping over export, right? And the system object just handles that
yeah.
edge case. Um, which I think I'm fine with. Like, I think it's fine to ignore batch export for now.
Okay, that simplifies things for now.
Yeah. Because I have a hard time imagining either exporter is going to be opinionated on how to handle that case, or they're just like, just loop over export. What's wrong with you? In which case, system, yeah, can handle that.
Okay, cool. So I'll remove this, and I'll modify the design document uh, to include thoughts on like CRD for connection as well, and update interface, and provide example for CRD and connection object as well.
Yeah, just like the load bearing uh, assumptions too, like the name equals
Yeah,
connection name, and figuring out how that data is piped through to the interface, right? Because there's the contents of that connection configuration, right? Some of that might be ingested by systems, some of that might be ingested by the exporter interface when we're establishing a new connection. Just making it clear where the data flows are going.
yeah.
Um, it's always worth trying to break the interface you've designed, right? Like, I get it. Like, this will probably satisfy hopefully all use cases, right? That we're aiming for. But and and I don't know if it's clear from talking to me about any design, but like, thinking about why it's wrong is more
Yeah.
important than thinking about why it's right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So if you
But it's
can,
just so hard to think about like why it's wrong when you're clearly going into a direction that wants you to make it work, you know?
well, that's like, you got to kind of like have both in your space,
Yeah.
in your brain space. Yeah, because like, clearly, if everything's just wrong all the time, then you never build at anything, and that's just a bad world to be in. But you don't want to get into that like optimism trap of going like, oh, this satisfies like the one thing that I was trying to do, ship it. And then you haven't thought about, wait, how does this fit into the larger picture? Or what if I want to do this other thing? Or what if, there's some change in requirements down the road? Like in, 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 in some ways it's an impossibility to cover all the edge cases, right? Because the search space is infinite.
Yeah.
But you just trying a little bit gives a lot of benefit.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. I'll have this ready before the next meeting, probably if I can, and then we can discuss it further.
Cool.
Sorry, it went overboard like 20 minutes.
Oh no, thank you for going over with me. I'm glad. It sounds like you feel like you have good direction. You're
Yeah,
happy with where this is headed.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool, cool.
Cool. Anything else from your side, Max?
Oh, I guess the other thought I would have when you're like dealing with the design stuff, I think audit gets simpler because we can use your multi-enforcement action design. Yeah, bringing your multi-enforcement action into this and figuring out whether that makes sense for audit and webhook, right? Because right now it's kind of unspecified if we have multiple connections. How do you
Yeah,
know which connection to use? And I think also there was this idea of like a global, hey, for all audit or webhook violations, like just always push to specified connection X.
yeah,
So yeah, making sure we have all the knobs we need to plumb all that through from user intent all the way to our codes. Make sure we're not backing ourselves into a corner. Uh, and also, we could think about Gator. I think Gator is interesting because we're getting into security concerns when you're talking about, hey, this is a config that opens up connections to some arbitrary unknown destination. We may want to lock down what data sources are allowed to specify connection configurations if we want to bring support to this into Gator.
what do you mean by data sources?
So, like, Gator accepts one or more directories as input, directories or files as input to the Gator command of Gator test.
Yep.
Now, let's just pretend I'm a malicious committer. And so I say, hey, I'm going to create a pub sub config, and I'm going to create a deny all object, and I'm just going to export everything that violates this deny all object to my new pub sub destination. And I
Hmm.
leverage that to get the entire manifest dump of the cluster.
Yeah.
So we
Wouldn't
probably
it be just violations, right? Like, but that's still a security risk. I do agree, but
right. Well, and the user can create their own constraint and
yeah,
constraint template the way Gator currently runs. So they control the contents of the violation, so they can make it be the
yeah,
contents of the object. So
yeah,
yeah, they could dump the contents of the manifest. This is the same concern that we have for external data, right? And why Gator doesn't currently support external data. So, and I'm not saying you need to solve this as part of this first design, right? Like, I think it's fine to say like Gator doesn't support PubSub yet.
Yeah.
But it's something to put on your radar as like a blocker to Gator supporting PubSub. It's also happens to be a blocker for Gator supporting external data, and maybe also users would like to lock down which folder they read, say, constraints and templates from, for instance. So there might be a generic problem to solve there.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Now I think I'm done.
Cool. So, yeah.
Cool.
See you next week.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Yeah. You too. Bye.